And yeah, my name is Loxman. I am with Meninges Global Alliance. And first of all, thanks to Lily and team at Bohai for hosting us, such a lovely place. And yeah, it's always a pleasure to be here in this space. So yeah, I would like to give it to Lily for your welcome remarks.
Right away, straight to business. Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Laxman, for the invitation. It's lovely to be here with you for the launch event of this fact sheet. I was just sharing earlier, it's really, I think there's something nice about having a physical copy, you know, you can just look through it and engage with it. It's a great resource and I hope we'll all get to use it. So I would just, as I was asked, provide a bit of framing for the conversation before we start. So I think, you know, all of us, as we are here, it's very obvious, you know, when you walk in the streets of New York, there's something really important happening here at the UN. So I think it's significant to be having this conversation during the General Assembly when the UN calendar kicks off, to kind of set the tone for the kinds of conversations we want to be having when it comes to how do we meaningfully engage men and boys. It's happening around important anniversaries. I think many of us yesterday were tuning in and paying attention to the high-level meeting yesterday on the 30th anniversary of Beijing. We also know that it's the 25th anniversary of 1325 next month. So it seems timely to be having this conversation. So again, I just want to thank Men Engaged for this publication, 10 Ways to Engage Men and Boys to Counter Backlash, fact sheet and guidance for activists, academics, practitioners in gender equality, human rights, democracy, and climate justice. As I mentioned, it's a really wonderful resource. And I think it helps to have definitions, you know, when we're having these kinds of conversations. So for example, when it comes to masculinities, it was really helpful to read through the fact sheet about how what we're talking about are the socially constructed ideas, expectations and behaviors about what it means to be a man, and how these are deeply tied to the growing backlash against gender rights. Like having this language helps us to have a conversation that goes deeper. So we're not just saying men and boys as a talking point and moving on. And I think we can all agree that what we're seeing today, the ferocious nature of this backlash presents formidable obstacles for us and the kind of progress that we have seen. So, you know, when we talk about engaging men and boys, how do we ensure that, you know, when we're talking about this, it's not being done in oppositional terms, that somehow if we gain progress for one group, it comes at the expense of the other. Like, how do we do that together? And how do we make sure that in advancing gender equality, we are also trying to have a conversation with men about how we have to learn to relinquish the short-term perceived privileges that come with how we understand to be a man in this world. And these advantages that have existed for a long time have been made possible through very rigid conceptions about the role and place of men and women in society. And these conceptions have hindered and harmed men and boys. And I think we need the language to be able to describe what this harm looks like, and how this has actually prevented many people from expressing the full range of their humanity. In many cases and in many societies, we see that men and boys have been socialized to reject qualities that are typically associated with the feminine or femininity, such as compassion, care, mutual support. These are all things that every single person needs to be able to thrive in the world. And I think we can see how the narrow notions related to the role of men and boys lead to distorted forms of progress, and they inhibit the advancements that have been made possible in a more equitable society. So in the context of course, the GA, but then I was asked to also think about beyond the GA. We can start to think about the Commission on the Status of Women, the 70th session that's going to be coming up, which is going to be about increasing access to justice. And I think in thinking about access to justice, of course, we'll think about the very technical aspects of access and the institutional mechanisms that allow for more and more women and girls to access these institutions. But justice is not something that we seek in judicial systems alone, or in legislation, no matter how well conceived these are. This kind of access is only as beneficial as actions are taken to implement the changes that are desired. And if people are not personally committed to the principles of justice and gender equality, then the laws that are meant to uphold the laws that the kinds of changes that we want to see are continually in danger of being subverted or ignored. So we have to have change at the level of the hearts, but also minds of people, as well as within the collective culture of any given population. And the fundamental task before the Commission this year is both broad and profound. How do we construct just societies that are fair and equitable for all, regardless of the gender or any characteristic of the people that we are dealing with? So, as the handbook is reminding us, men hold disproportionate power as gatekeepers across many sectors of society, and without their active involvement and support in advancing gender justice, the efforts that we're all contributing to will remain limited or face resistance from within these institutions as well as individually. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, to learning from all of you, and really thinking about how we can strategically move forward. Over to you.
Thank you, Lily, for that warm welcome, and then very great start on positioning or locating the topic that we are trying to do a little bit more today in that broader realm of where we stand in the broader context of gender equality and social justice and democracy, and how do we begin to understand and unpack what's happening around men and masculinities, or with boys and men, in the current landscape that we are standing in. So we have colleagues joining online as well, and thank you for joining. Also, on those who are joining online, as Jenny has already included in the chat, we have interpretation, AI interpretation through Zoom. So you can select the language that you want to see or read the caption, which is enabled at the moment. You can do that as well. And as I said, this publication or the session that we are organizing is on behalf of the Coalition on Men, Masculinities and Countering Backlash, which includes, this is a very informal space with some of the like-minded organizations and individuals that came together actually in last year's CSW with the interest of really all of us coming together as a community and collectively sharing and supporting each other on how do we really fine-tune, how do we understand backlash in the current context, then what do we really do with boys and men in the current scenario where it seems or feels like more men and boys are not really supporting and coming forward to support feminism, gender equality, social justice and human rights, or even democracy at this point in time. So what do we really do with boys and men? So in that conversation led to us, being some specific activities that included production of this fact set, which is supposed to be, as Lily said, very hands-on, very practical, very, the toned down language that some of us are generally use in our many spaces with lots of jargons and, concepts, but how not to do that was the idea of behind producing this fact set, which would be very handy, easy to pick, easy to read, and easy to apply in the work that we are doing. So I hope we have managed to meet that expectation that we wanted with this publication, and that you all will find this resource as a useful one in the work you all are doing as well. So with that, we have the members from the coalition in the room as well. And maybe those of you who are members may raise your hand. And yeah, also we have colleagues who are joining online, who are also probably members of the coalition. And we have kept this coalition as a safe space as well, given the backlash we face back home. So some of us are not really putting forward with our logos being so upfrontly used and so on. That is the reason why you don't see all the logos, but we felt some logos will add value to the document itself to bring about this coalition as behind the material that is being produced. But this is very collectively developed process and a product. And there will be a few more coming, which I'll share towards the end of the session of what the coalition is doing. So yeah, with that bit of a background, I would like to invite Ayesha from SBRI. And maybe I think after this, we can quickly go and do a quick round of introduction before we start the debate. You might be wondering why we haven't introduced yet, but yeah, just like that. Yeah, now we'll flow. So over to you, Ayesha.
Thank you so much, Lakshman. And can people online hear clearly?
Yeah.
Is there? Okay,
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
Yeah, so my name is Ayesha Margot. I am from the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and I'm the Global Advocacy Director there. And I'm really thrilled to be here today and thank you for the invite to start opening some of this conversation on countering the backlash against women's rights and what I'm going to call men's allyship as opposed to engagement in the struggle for gender equality, and then to launch this fact sheet, which we're all actually really excited about. So listening to the presentations, I was at the meeting that Lily alluded to, the UN high-level meeting on Beijing +30. And at the first hour or so were presentations from various stakeholders, including civil society and a lot of ministers. And there was this sort of common theme that 30 years on, while we expected to be celebrating a lot of progress and all the work that has been done, and while that is an element of our current context, we're actually dealing with a very different reality to what we expected. And that is that women's rights are facing significant pushback. We are seeing attempts to roll back legal protections, to restrict women's bodily autonomy, to silence feminist voices, and actually fully to delegitimize all gender equality work itself, which is frankly a disservice to all people and certainly not just women and girls. Again, we know, and we've discussed it so much in this coalition, the backlash isn't incidental. It's organized, it's well-resourced, it's increasingly global in its reach. And it has now been accompanied by massive, massive cuts in funding for work on gender equality, as well as for research, for evidence building, knowledge generation. And something struck me that the UN Women's Executive Director said yesterday in this meeting, Seema Bahus, and she said, this isn't just a reversal, it is in fact a retreat. And I think it's actually quite a powerful way to understand this, because we are in fact retreating, and we're retreating into fear, the retrenchment of old hierarchies, and we're building now on narratives that thrive on the suggestion that women's gains come at men's expense, as you mentioned. We're building on nostalgia for rigid gender roles, and of course on the vilification of anyone who doesn't fit patriarchal or heteronormative ideals. And I think we can go as far as to say that anti-gender movements frame equality itself as a threat to society, right? So this kind of brings me to a lot of what we're discussing today. As Laura Bates has recently talked about in her new work on AI and misogyny, we've always had resistance to social justice movements, but now we have digital platforms that supercharge these dynamics. The algorithms that now exist very quickly push young men into spirals of misogynistic and extremist content. So if any one of us goes online and pretends to be an adolescent boy, her research showed, and this is obviously in a specific global context, in a specific context of her country, but within 30 minutes, she was getting, very extremist, misogynistic content. And this is obviously even whether you're looking for it or not. So I guess that's just to say that backlash isn't cultural and political only, it's algorithmic. And again, paraphrasing Laura Bates, this online aspect of it is helping us to build a new world, except it's a new world that we really, really don't want. At least we can kind of assume that those of us in this room don't. Maybe it's a big assumption, because it is a world that's fundamentally predicated on discriminatory attitudes towards women and discriminatory attitudes towards marginalized groups of people. So I think that is really just important to sit with and then go, okay, but why? Why are we saying that we have to be talking to men and we have to be talking to boys? And I want to separate that because I want to make the point that we do need to acknowledge that men and boys are not the same, right? They are at developmentally different stages. As adults, men do or can hold power, make choices, and occupy decision-making roles in families, in communities, and in institutions, whereas boys are at a developmental phase where our approach needs to be distinct. So while with men, we can talk about responsibility and accountability for change and working together. With boys, we need to really be talking about prevention, right? So supporting healthy development, promoting positive masculinities early, protecting boys from harms such as child abuse and violence in childhood, which we know increases the likelihood of later perpetration of violence. So skipping back again to why, yes, we need to do this critical work together, but we need to remember it's not just men and boys always together in that same sentence. Yes, they are the primary targets of anti-gender ideologies. The far-right and conservative movements do prey on men, especially young men who feel isolated or disempowered, promising a return to a strong hierarchical masculinity and a mythical social order. And we do obviously need to actively engage with these narratives and not let them spread unchecked. Secondly, and Lily's already mentioned this, men do hold enormous disproportionate power as gatekeepers in politics, religion, media, business. And again, someone in the meeting yesterday, one of the presidents from one of the EU countries said, out of, I think, 180 countries, there are 15 women who are leaders of state. It's something like that. I didn't get the exact number, or 16. So we really do need men to actively be involved in these discussions. And finally, the fact that it's in everybody's best interest, including men, young men, boys, to have a capacity and a stake in building something better and in mobilizing alongside women to counter regressive politics and to advance gender and social justice. And yeah, it sounds silly, but create a better world for us all. So just to kind of finally round up, I know I only have 7 minutes and I don't think I've used them yet. I think I have 2 left. Evidence, and okay, I'm from SPRI, so I'm always going to say this, evidence is critical. We need the evidence to understand how the anti-gender movements are shaping young men's identities. We need deeper inquiry into how tech design choices, including search algorithms and content moderation systems, actually perpetuate harm. And we need to build on what we know about and what we already know on what works to shift norms, to increase our understanding then of how to do this norm shifting work in online spaces. And many people are doing amazing work on this. Without this, we really do risk investing in approaches that reinforce harmful dynamics or just don't make any kind of difference. And I think around the world, we're already seeing hopeful examples. And Lakshman, I know you and Jenny are going to present some of this, the strategies and some examples. But, men joining women's movements to demand ends to femicide in Latin America. We've seen youth leaders in South Asia promoting nonviolent masculinities, fathers engaged through parenting programs that have really helped break intergenerational cycles of violence. And we have a lot of evidence on this from the violence prevention field. So we know that change is possible, and we know that we need to work together. And we need to work together deliberately, strategically, and using the evidence at hand. So I think as we begin our discussion today, what I would just really like to end with is let's kind of hold 2 truths at one time. One, that the backlash that we keep talking about is real, it is dangerous, and it is intensifying. We have no doubts about that. But 2, that we do have tools and we do have the collective power to counter it. We have clear evidence from the violence prevention field that effective programs engage both men and women, and that together we are effective and we are more powerful. But to be more powerful, we need to act across sectors, across movements, and across borders. And we need to have the courage to stand up for a more just and inclusive world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Aisha. So that's kind of, gives us a logic of, pulling this together as a way to sort of start being mindfully and strategically intervene and integrate the work with boys and men. And from the lens, as we call it, as men and masculinities lens, on how men and masculinity is being utilized, not only shaped and reshaped, but utilized to strengthen this backlash against feminism or gender equality as an agenda. So I think that is where, so we'll spend a lot of time on discussing on that and hearing from different colleagues as well. So now I think it's a good time to start introducing people in the room as well, and colleagues, feel free to introduce in the chat to those of you who are joining online. Shall I start with you, Alan?
Hi everyone, Alan Gregg. I'm an independent consultant based here in New York. I've worked with Men Engage over many years on a range of tasks.
Hi, I'm Juanita Ardila. I'm currently working as project coordinator on pet care policies at the UNDP.
Erin Kelly, Gender Equality Program Advocacy Communications at the Gates Foundation.
Hi everyone, Slawomir Ahmed. I'm a senior policy advisor with WS Foreign Policy Collaborative and happy to be a member of the.
Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Munadi Gazita. I come from Uganda. I work with the Forum for Women in Democracy.
Hello everyone, Odanga Madum, journalist covering the manosphere for the Guardian's NEM, and also a fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School.
Carl Morello, United States Power Community Human Rights.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lopa Banerjee, I'm the director of the Civil Society Division at UN Women.
Good afternoon, Kamsawan Jantabishop with UN Movement.
Hi, everybody. Lily Kumsmana, rep to the UN.
Sorry, I've already introduced myself, so I'll go on to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Suveni Wali and I'm also an independent consultant working in the gender equality space, and currently I'm supporting Breakthrough in global partnerships.
Hi, I'm Noena. I work with an organization called Breakthrough. We primarily work in India.
Hi, Brooke Cutler. I'm a consultant focused right now on the intersection of gender parity in political leadership and unpaid care.
Hi everyone, Maggie Roach. I'm a senior associate on the girls and women's team at the UN Foundation.
Hi everyone, I'm Veronica Brown and I'm the coordinator of the Women's Media Group.
So yeah, my name is Loxman. Again, to repeat, I am one of the co-directors of Meninges Global Alliance, and I have my colleagues online as well. Yuri there with the co-director as well, and Jenny from the team. We have some of our speakers joining online as well. So we were just doing the introduction, if you mind.
That's what it sounds like. Hi, I'm Alexander De Croo. I'm former Prime Minister. I was Prime Minister until 6 months ago in Belgium. And this topic is something which is close to my heart, so I'll talk about it afterwards.
Thank you for joining. So we'll spend maybe 10-15 minutes just to go over the fact set. And over to you, Jenny, to kick us start with that.
Wonderful. Can everyone see inside the room?
Yes,
I think, Lydia, I'm just going to mute you. Great. Sounds good. Well, let's get started then. Wonderful to be here. We're just going to take a few minutes to present, as Laxman was sharing, the document, no? And hold on one second. Intended as a resource for activists, practitioners, academics, and policymakers. We will share an update on a secondary document we're looking to publish to build upon this with more specific policy recommendations. But an interesting thing that always happens, when we present policy recommendations for working with men and boys, a lot of policymakers ultimately come back and say, but how do you do this work with men and boys? How do you actually engage them across a variety of topics? So consider this fact sheet like that preliminary resource that really gets into how does this work need to happen, and how that can be then parlayed into policy recommendations, and we'll be developing that document and sharing it shortly. So at the crux of this document, we analyze the problem. It's already been arising from speakers, but at the crux of how are masculinities deeply implicated in the rising backlash. And the point is that the masculinities are not passively caught up in anti-gender movements. They're actively constructed, mobilized, weaponized, and upheld, to maintain a system of patriarchy, nationalism, capitalism. We're seeing this, for example, with gunfluencers that are now shaping, this new form of patriarchal masculinities online. And masculinities are used as the emotional fuel and the cultural and political logic of many anti-rights movements. We sort of identified around 5 key categories, no, of how precisely this is done. And of course, masculinity as a tool for authoritarianism and nationalism. We know authoritarian leaders perform a hypermasculinity, no, put forward a strongman personality deeply rooted in patriarchal masculinities. With a rhetoric that's often anti-feminist, anti-LGBTIQ, anti-immigrant. And so they position these groups, these movements as threats to the nation and to them as the manly protector, defender. We also see quite strongly this mobilization of aggrieved masculinities, in which men are portrayed as victims, of feminism, of gender equality. And so this crisis of masculinity really positions that men are becoming powerless, And we've seen the rise, of course, of men's rights movements, incel groups, and manospheres that are actively engaging within this discourse of the aggrieved masculinities. And also online masculinities and radicalization, the online space, as we know, has become a fertile ground for the construction and spread of patriarchal masculinities. And so many social media platforms are profiting from the spread of dominant, controlling, misogynistic, anti-feminist discourse. And also we know many content creators are specifically targeting men and boys to recruit them into these various spaces, making that quite an important tool for gaining more supporters. And also gender justice presented and feminism presented as anti-male. So really at the core of this sort of tactic, is the positioning that advancements in women's rights and feminism are attacking men and specifically, anti-male. And finally, restoring traditional power hierarchies, The anti-gender movements often idealize the past, where men are providers and protectors and women are nurturers and homemakers. And that the changes brought on, the progress, by feminist and queer movements are seen as threats to the natural order and to men's social status. And what is the solution? I think colleagues have already began addressing these, but we know men are specifically being garnered, recruited for anti-rights ideological movements. So what can we do there, to prevent that from happening? We also know, as many have shared, that men hold disproportionate power in corporations and government, in all institutions. So how can we work with them as gatekeepers, in order to counter this backlash? And we also know that men and boys have the capacity, to actively support visions for gender, social, and climate justice. So how do we specifically do that work of creating allyship and shared vision? And the how, maybe I'll pass it on to you, Laxman, to go through these with the group.
Sure, yeah. So in that background context, when we were zooming on, okay, then what exactly practically, what are the ways that we can engage or have this engagement more meaningful and accountable at the same time, so that it doesn't reinforce the same patriarchy again through the work with boys and men, right? So we have been saying that the work with boys and men needs to be feminist informed, gender transformative all the time. But how do we really do that? What are the parameters that we really need to keep in mind? So I think, the first one is, again, the reframing the victimhood narrative. I think, the way the current narrative is going around is that, the feminism and gender equality or feminist movement are against men, which is really, really untrue as to, if we look at the essence of the work. So we need to sort of challenge this narrative being created of a crisis of masculinities or crisis of man as such, to, sort of by showcasing how, patriarchy also harms men. And what does that mean then for their own engagement and responsibility around that? Also replace that loss of the perceived or created sense of loss to making it more of the benefit of gender equality. And I think that is more what gets connected and trust and connected with the sense of what men and boys have around femininity or feminism or work around gender equality and so on. The second is also that this work need to inherently sift the patriarchal entitlement. Sometimes we get into this conversation where boys in particular or young men come and say that I don't understand, I don't I don't think we have that level of privilege as we talk about or what feminism talks about. So it's all about sort of sifting that narrative to help them understand what exactly are we or do we mean by when we say there is a male privilege as part of the structure, and unpacking that really helps them to understand where they are located. Not only then look at sifting the entitlement, but also understanding how patriarchy actually is harming themselves as well, and why there is so much of benefit for boys and men to be part of this movement around feminism. And then also foster allyship and accountability. As I said, the work and engagement of boys and men, we do want to have it in a very accountable way. But also that it's not to position or fostering allyship, but allyship in the sense also we are calling as accountable allyship. Sometimes the allyship has been gone into this direction of very convenient allyship, because if I'm feeling comfortable, I'll join, otherwise I can stay back. That's also a privilege, right? So how do we really make that as an accountable allyship as to become an agent of change as well? And then motivate boys and men to be really, really taking concrete steps and the responsibilities. Also engage men in politics. And that's where a lot of allyship conversation on men in positions of power will have to be engaging with that population as well. As as I was sharing, all of boys and men are placed in the positions of power. So how do we really mobilize them in a most accountable way? And then again, constantly we need to monitor and counter anti-gender narratives. But when we say counter, not to be reactive. Reacting to a particular narrative is not helping at all. But reacting countering that in a very strategic way, and doing that in a strategic way is what we are really. And then how do we do that so that boys and men also start monitoring what's happening? How are they becoming implicated, or how are they being called out or being attracted towards these spaces, so that they can start monitoring and then expose how these spaces are really manipulative as well. And then use advocacy campaigns to present some progressive and more helpful alternative to this rhetoric that has been created. And we know that people are young men who have actually come out from the manosphere spaces telling how frustrating that space is, even though their argument is it's safe space for boys and men, but actually it has been more harmful for boys and men as well. So there's narratives. Jenny, over to you.
Please go ahead if you want to finish off the 10 recommendations.
Okay. And then also there's creating spaces, but creating community. We call it sometimes safe space, but safe space doesn't mean that we are patting each other's back, right? It's a critical, challenging space where we challenge each other, but in definitely a constructive and in a helpful way, right? It's not to push people out of the boundary, but invite them to be critical enough of the situation, the power, the privilege, and what patriarchy has been meaning structurally as well as relationally in their own lives, and what does it mean. So creating space is becoming really, really important. And then when creating spaces also, we need to be careful about not segregating spaces either, and be a little more, and in the experience that group education methodologies have really been helpful in that space to create that leadership as well as opportunity for boys and men to step in accountable leadership or agents of change in the space. The other is to also use right messengers. So it depends on who is in that space, who is leading the conversation, or who is facilitating the conversation. So that is really something we need to be careful about. Who are we mobilizing as influencer or peers with boys and men, and also train them, the messengers, very rigorously to begin with. Sometimes what we have seen is that those who are facilitating unknowingly or knowingly or intentionally or unintentionally reinforcing what actually we are trying to dismantle as well. So the people who are the messenger will have to be really, really well trained, and that they have that ability to facilitate and engage in a constructive way and manipulate or facilitate the conversation in that sense. Also focus on sexuality education, mental health, and care, and also create that as the principle of organizing or bringing together boys and men. And one of the, Backlash, the major orientation of the focus is on sexuality and sexual rights or, bodily autonomy. So bring that, and sex and sexuality is a huge primary topic for boys and men, and with curiosity as well. So how do we leverage that curiosity and build onto that and bring them also on the issue that is mostly and highly attacked by the anti-rights groups as well. And then also make sure that there is a care around it, because confronting, engaging in this space can be really, really challenging, both physically but also mentally. So how do we create that space for care, collective care, and and have that space being created, or also engage in creative media for shifting the narratives? Because I think our lives are no more isolated in one room, right? We are always online, as Isa was also alluding to, is that our life has become very fluid in online and offline space. And what happens in these two spaces can reinforce different things in the full spectrum. So how do we really understand what's happening between these two spaces of the full spectrum, and then devise and focus on using different media and use creatively the mediums that are being used to counter misogynistic online content with a bit more accessible language or accessible narratives around there. And also another group that we have realized is utilizing spiritual and religious entry points. There has been data where 95% population in the world have some kind of faith or spiritual orientation. So how do we also build onto that, which is very, very massive, and also is a lens that is being used from a religious point of view, used to fuel the backlash as well, right? So how do we really also use that space to work progressively with the faith leaders or religious leaders and ground that with the shared values of justice and dignity, and then also hold powerful religious leaders accountable for enabling the backlash, but also not doing enough to uphold the human rights and dignity of people who have been historically oppressed by the system. And focus on men in positions of power, as we said, as also power as focus of agents of change and the target as well, because they do play a huge gatekeeping role in shaping or reconstruction of different kinds of narrative around patriarchy and role of boys and men, or gender equality as an agenda, and build more politically resilient male leaders that can publicly really committing to stand for gender equality. So these are the 10 outlines of ways that we can engage in this work. So with that, anything to add, Jenny?
Nothing from my end. Looking forward to hearing our speakers unpack these topics more. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. And then, the next phase is that we have some colleagues invited for responding and engaging in dialogue as well. So we have Alexander DePro, thank you for joining. We have Alex DiFranco, who is joining online. I saw her somewhere. Yeah, there you go. And we have Alan Gregg joining here as well. And we have Nayana from Breakthrough here. And then we were expecting Mabel to be joining as well. She must be.
She's on her way.
She's on her way. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I think what we wanted to do is to spend for about 30-40 minutes or so on looking at three questions that we really want you to respond, and up to you on how you would like to start and respond as well. The problem is, looking at the problem, through your research or policy work and practice, what you have been doing, have you seen anti-rights actors utilizing ideologies centered on patriarchal masculinities as recruiting boys and men, right? What have you really seen? What have you experienced? Also to focus on the solution, right? What do you see the rationale for why engaging boys and men is a crucial strategy to counter backlash? Share from your work or lived experience what you have observed. And then the third one is the how. obviously, right? So what resonates with you from the fact sheet as we have presented so far as a practical guideline on how to do this work more effectively? And if there is anything we have really missed, right? We all are still learning, evolving as well. We may have missed out something that might be helpful. So should we start with you, if you don't mind? Yeah.
Thank you. In 2018, so this is 7 years ago, I wrote a book which was called The Age of Women, Why Feminism is Good for Men. I never thought that that would be such a big topic. And I remember that I grew up in an environment where feminism was logical. My mother was a very staunch feminist. And as a young kid, when I was 6 years old, I knew what affirmative action was. I knew what quota was. I grew up with that. And then I had a long way and doing politics, I came back on this topic because I thought that feminism was not needed anymore. I thought, we've achieved everything, which was obviously not the case. What I tried to do was to explain that besides what you would call rights-based approach around feminism, which explains that, it's logical, that you have the same rights and so on, you have another argument, which is a more economic argument, which basically says, well, why are we wasting so much opportunity? And how can we as a society have only half of the population have the opportunity that you should have? Why did I take that angle? That is because, and I think that's a problem, feminism is too often seen as a topic about women for women. And it's a topic where often men are being shielded out. And I think that's an issue, because that leads to part of the behavior that you just described, which is very often men will see it as threatening and will go stand shoulder to shoulder and close the ranks. And in general, men are actually quite good in doing that. So what I try to use as another type of argument is this type of economic argument. And one is not superior to the other, but I think the opportunity argument or economic argument is actually one that you can use in a good way. And I remember that when that book came out in Belgium, I had very strange reactions. Reactions from women who were like, who the hell do you think you can talk about this? This is our topic. Please stay out. That behavior is there as well. And also, of course, men who were like, why are you trying to make yourself interesting on this topic? And I during a period, I did a lot of speeches on this topic, and I engaged a lot on this. Now, fast forward to today, things definitely have not improved today. And I think that we really have an issue with, and I would say rather with young men. They really have an issue. And where in the past we would say, well, we need policies to enable women to create a conducive environment for women to thrive. And I know I'm stereotyping, but it makes it easier for the discussion. I'm convinced now that we need to create, and we have measures to actually help young men. And that's because the society in which we live builds on skills, experiences, and capacities that are not typically male skills. The typical male skills of, well, we describe masculinity, physical strength, hierarchy. The world is not going in that direction. The world is actually today, if you want to be successful, you are good in social skills, you are good in handling emotions, you are good with ambiguity, which typically are qualities that are more on the female side. And over the past years, I've seen often in interacting with young men, how they are incredibly indoctrinated. Now, we can complain about that and find counter arguments, but the real question is, why is it so easy that they are indoctrinated? So why do they feel so uncertain? Why do they feel threatened in who they are? And then you have mechanisms around that are actually really powerful. One of the things I saw is that young men have a tendency to try to show that they know better because they've done their own research. And that's all the conservative mechanisms play on that extremely well. And just using 2 minutes, I saw that at an environment where I really did not expect it. I was once invited by Oxford Union, and Oxford Union is like the student organization of Oxford. One can not say that Oxford is a place where people are not intelligent or not entitled or didn't have opportunities. I mean, this is one of the finest institutions in the world. And I had a debate there, and afterwards we went for a few drinks, and I asked some people, hey, what do you want to talk about? And so a group of, yes, men came to me and said, well, I think the number one issue we need to talk about is the falling natality rate in Europe. I was like, all right. I didn't see that one coming. Is this really what you want to talk about? But okay, let's do it. And then they said, well, but the real issue is that women don't have enough kids. I'm like, yeah, but as far as I know, I think that having kids is something generally you do as a couple. I mean, it's not only, it's a bit too easy to blame women. Now, of course, this was not really about natality. This is about a whole argument being made to push women back into the kitchens and not in the workforce. But I use this anecdote to show that, I mean, these are people who are smart, well-educated, have plenty of opportunities. But really the tone that they used to me was like, yeah, but I hear what you're saying, but I know better. And I'm not listening to what you mainstream person are saying. And yes, I am a centrist politician, so I might look not credible from their perspective. But that element of, I know better, I have figured it out myself, I have found the data. That's an interesting tactic that is being used, and maybe we need to be smarter in using that tactic as well. And the second element is just sheer insecurity. I had an element, again, campaign element, talking to young people. And again, same question, hey, what do you want to talk about? And they said, well, we think there's really a problem with transgenders. And I'm like, okay, then what is that problem really? Well, it's a scandal that they have their own, basically their own toilets. I'm like, really? I mean, in Belgium, this is not the case at all. I mean, I know that in the US, this is a heated debate. I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, and why is this such a problem? I tried to put it on the angle of, you know, why don't we just respect everyone and whatever people want to do in their private lives? Why is it an issue for you? That I think was really on the masculinity side of male young men being questioning on how they deal with their own sexuality and what does it mean and how far you can go and so on. But that moment, which I guess with men is somewhere between 15 and 18, is a moment where they're really being indoctrinated. So I use these examples of what I have seen that is being used in the other direction. So I think that we really need to do an active effort to men on that category of age. I think don't be too, how to say, play on their curiosity, make them discover it themselves instead of telling them we are being seen as not trustworthy and mistrusted and so on. That is one element. And then I think you need role models. And that was actually the goal of my book 8 years ago, where I basically said, look, if we want to have gender equality, you will need male champions and you will need men that believe in this and that do it, that don't say it, but that do it on a daily basis. And I think that's the way forward. This is not publicly broadcast, this podcast, right? So I can talk a bit freely. Well, I think I already did. Yeah, exactly. I read an article somewhere that explained, I think it was a Dutch relationship therapist, who said, you know, the whole backlash that you see now, it's the revenge of shitty men. And I thought that was actually quite well said. I mean, this is an environment where, as men who maybe have a classic view, this is not an easy environment. This is an environment where you have to be able to work and handle women who are quite powerful and who will challenge you. And in a relationship, well, you know, the standard today is that, you know, we're equals, and it's not that men come home and kick their shoes off and say, please serve me. That element, which is more relationship element, I think is quite a perversive one. And you have a category of men that actually are not comfortable to be around with emancipated and strong women. That will demand quite some effort. But and then I'm finishing. I have a 14 and 17-year-old boys. And, at some point I had with them what they call the talk, which is basically, well, let's talk about sexual education. Right? And, the technical things, they had that in school. So I didn't have to explain that to them. But the real conversation I had with them is like, how do you interact with women? If I ever see you bullying a woman, if I ever see intimidating, and that conversation on, okay, how do you interact in a world where women today are powerful and so on? How do you do that? I think that conversation needs to be had much more often.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. I do that conversation with my 16 years old as well. And I understand what you mean, their curiosity, their positioning of, I know this, I have figured something out, but not really.
Well, not everyone yet.
And then, that notion of I know, and then, sort of this argument of, feminism has gone too far. That's really, really the topic among young people. And then also, what we have seen is that the anti-rights groups are using this, what is called pseudo research to, use that argument of, there are research articles produced to counter some of this narrative. And it is very intentional. And I don't think we have paid too much of attention on that yet, but I think there is more and more this pseudo research being produced by the anti-rights groups, up to the level that at the earlier CSW, there was some men rights group and they had a flyer, and the indicators of why men are being underprivileged because of patriarchy. One of the indicators was men are killed at a higher rate by the lightning. Right?
Seventh point.
No idea, what's the logic there? But it is happening.
Yeah, it is true.
It's true because that's
So because they're in general more stupid when they're because they don't lie down.
And with that, I would like to invite Alex. You're online, and and if you want to chime in and share your thoughts, and also introduce yourself, Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex DeBranco. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Institute for Research on Male Supremacism. We were founded in 2019 because we were really seeing that there was not an awareness of male supremacism as an ideology. We were seeing increasing attacks related to misogynist incels, really not rooted in the same kind of understandings that we have as a scholar coming from the US around white supremacist violence, and also as someone who had worked in spheres around sexual violence and intimate partner abuse and gender-based violence, seeing how often that was seen as sort of something other, like we fund this in a charitable sense, but we're not thinking about the roots of male supremacism that are beneath these really rampant rates of violence broadly. And so we founded the Institute to really kind of shift understandings around misogynist ideology and its root causes. And we have definitely seen a lot in the now just about 6 years from our founding of more understanding around the role that male supremacist ideology plays, and also, continued kind of misconceptions in addressing it. As a result, we've increasingly worked on kind of trying to understand what we see through our work and bringing that into kind of root understandings. So IRMS now has more than 70 fellows and mentees around the globe. We really benefit from this transnational community in being able to bring together various concepts and to be able to look at things like, while the specific issue might change from region to region, the kind of base ideology and framing underneath it is the same. And so we look, for instance, at there has been a lot of collaboration amongst misogynist men's rights groups from the United States and the UK to India. They've looked at the success that Indian men's or fathers' rights groups have had in rolling back some of the protections that were put in place around dowry abuse. And you can see that from that context to the US context, it's the same kind of conversation about women as liars, attempting to control or subjugate men that are used to roll back any of these kinds of anti-violence provisions. And so we've come together in this work, and we have a new white paper that's going to be coming out this fall talking about dehumanization and entitlement as those paired roots of supremacism, that this is what comes together to bring any kind of supremacist movement, and in the form of male supremacism, particularly thinking about how it manifests in attacks on bodily autonomy, anti-consent, biological essentialism, etc. And so in looking at the work we've done, and I really appreciated the report that we're talking about here today. And I think that the part that most resonated with me was the line about enabling men and boys to be their full human selves. And I felt that was really important framing, especially as we think about in Gen Z and seeing this globally, that as opportunities are opening up to understand gender as a spectrum, not just a binary, we see more young people embracing that for themselves. And I think that one of the sort of concerns and tensions of a lot of ways that sort of healthy masculinities work has been done is it really reifies that concept of gender essentialism, and that the way that you need to grow up from a boy into a man is a masculine sense, even if it's a masculinity sense that is informed by what are considered more kind of healthy functions. And I think that element, we know things like what's referred to as benevolent sexism or chivalry is inextricably paired with hostile sexism and more violent approaches, that there's been a lot of psychological studies of this. And it's really, really difficult to divorce those two things because there are expectations involved with healthy masculinities about the kind of femininity that women will still uphold. And so I'm really appreciative of this opening towards a framework of thinking about more universally how we work with people as full kind of human selves. I think that the focus on sexuality education and media entertainment are also two areas that we at IRMS have really invested in thinking about rooting our work. And so the second thing that I want to say kind of about the approach that we have from a historically informed perspective is that we need to be really careful to remember that when we come at this work from a it's good for you too frame, rather than a frame that's oriented in justice and empathy, that we run the risk of reproducing the roots of the men's rights movement in the first place. So the 1970s men's rights movement was started in a lot of ways by an individual who was active with feminist movements, with the National Organization for Women. And he was recruiting men into feminism by telling them that patriarchy harms you too. And it took a really hostile shift, and we had this split into men's liberation and men's rights, because the people in the men's rights movement felt that women were outpacing them in their gains. And we're looking at a period where this is the period where we don't have any rape shield laws in effect. Women still need their husband's signatures in most states in the United States for credit cards, for loans. And so because the way that this was taught was divorced from the structural sense and the justice and care and empathy oriented sense, that they expected that they were going to gain in the same way, instead of thinking about the oppression that was already there. And so we really are big proponents of working on things like sexuality education and entertainment media, and incorporating men and boys in universal programming. And so we've worked a lot with Drag Story Hour since they've been increasingly attacked in the United States, and trying to understand, why do groups like this come under attack so much? Why has sexuality education for at least the past half century been a big focus of attack? And I think it is because these are the spaces where you learn that any kind of gender expression is okay, where you learn to respect consent, where you learn that people, are all human, and to care about that. When we see book banning attempts, they go after books that have this kind of humanity at their core and gender expression. And Heron Greensmith, a researcher in this work, has talked about how something like Drag Story Hour is inherently anti-authoritarian, that we are certainly seeing in the United States right now, how much authoritarianism is built on these senses of biological essentialism. And so we really, really aim towards thinking about, and I appreciate also the distinction made between boys and men, growing up boys and girls and non-binary people to be their full human selves all together in this kind of universal programming in education, in sex ed, in media, that reaches everyone together and allows them to work together, so that we can have this kind of generational growth year over year. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention was just to think about, as we kind of orient people into certain areas, how flawed many of those areas still are. And so the focus on mental health has been a really big push of a lot of groups dealing with radicalization. But mental health practitioners are really not taught as part of their training to recognize elements of supremacism. And they're also actually often not even deeply educated in recognizing abuse. If you talk to many domestic abuse counselors, they'll say that they do not recommend that people who are victims in abusive couples go to a couples therapist, because the couples therapist is probably not trained to recognize that, and more often than not ends up joining in of the gaslighting of the victimized partner, because they fall for this victimhood narrative that's been described. And so at the same time, as we're thinking about these kinds of areas around education and mental health support and other things that can serve boys and men and everybody kind of consistently, we also have to think about, in what way do these structures need to change in order for them to actually be healthy places to go to, that aren't going to reinforce inaccurate victim narratives that people might come in with. And instead thinking about these structural trainings themselves to make sure that our mental health practitioners are trained in the same way, for instance, as our counselors who work with intimate partner violence perpetrators have been trained to recognize the elements of accountability, the adherence to traditional gender molds, the entitlement, the dehumanization of others, all those aspects that go into what makes a person feel entitled to commit violence against another person, particularly gender-based violence in this context, and thinking about how we can actually create stronger structures that will enable us to not just move people into something like mental health treatment that's actually going to reinforce their sense of victimization. I think this is the same thing we sometimes see with building relationships too. And so making sure we root it in that core sense as well. Yeah, so thank you so much for this really engaging resource.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I think, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we need to look at the transnational nature of it as well and how that is becoming, even though we feel, that they are coordinated, they are fragmented as well, but have found a way to come together in a coordinated way because there isn't this probably not very good term to use, but this common enemy approach. And I think that they have found a way to come together. And I think that also needs to be our strategy on our end, that we have to find a way to come together as well, much more strongly. And also the issue of when we talk about boys and men, also to make it clear that boys and men on in itself are gendered beings as well. So I think to look at how do we bring that conversation when we talk about boys and men as part of, be they being able to be the fuller sense of themselves, also comes with that reality of we are groomed to behave in a particular way, think in a particular way. How do we inculcate that, that they disown or unlearn that the socialization that we have gone through? And I think how do we build on to that? So yeah, I will then invite Alan to join in. So you've been in the space, you have helped Meninges as well on shaping the focus on what the backlash should look like and our strategies. So yeah, if you want to jump in.
Okay, thanks, Lakshman. And great to see so many people joining us online. Yeah, so I'm going to make a few remarks about this document that I also worked on. The remarks are based partly on, I led a consultation last year with Menengage members to talk about their experiences with backlash and what they were encountering and what they felt they needed in terms of support to respond better. I also should say that what I'm going to say is informed by living through the last period of MAGA onslaught on US society, and just to acknowledge the emotional intensity of that I'm definitely feeling. I'm sure everybody in this room is feeling. We were just reminded of it if you paid any attention to the speech over the road there earlier today. So I'm definitely feeling a kind of urgency around this conversation. I think the first thing to say is that I don't think we should generalize backlash. It's not one thing. It's a different thing in different places. It may have common ideas, but it's a different thing in different places, not least because the actual threat to traditional hierarchies varies considerably, obviously, across the world, right? So the extent to which there is actually progress on gender equality and sexual rights varies dramatically, depending where you are in the world. So I think it's a mistake to see it as just a single reaction to a single progress. It isn't. And it's resonating with different issues in different places. In parts, some places it's tied into a kind of anti-colonial narrative. Gender equality is a colonial imposition. In where I come from in Britain and here as well, it's tied to an anti-immigrant narrative, a racist narrative. So we need to pay attention to the differences. And I think it's also important to understand that, to me, it's not just a nostalgic thing. So it may be partly restorationist, but to me, it's also insurrectionist, right? There's a radical energy that's driving a lot of this stuff. It's an anti-systemic energy. That came out clearly from the consultations with Menengage members, right? It isn't drawing young men in because they want to restore the 1950s, right? It's drawing young men in because they hate what they're living through now, the system. And this is coded, backlash is coded as being anti-system. It's tearing down established structures, tearing down elites who've imposed this ideology on us, right? So there's a radical energy which we need to reckon with. I think it's a mistake if we see it as just a conservative movement. It's not just a conservative movement, it's a radical movement. And that's because it's happening in a context of sometimes what's referred to as polycrisis, right? There's proliferating crises, political, economic, ecological. So there's a widespread sense of disorder. So the backlash is partly an appeal to re-establishing or imposing a new order, right? If you listen to people like Musk, he's not, I don't see Musk as a nostalgic figure, right? He's building something new, right? On Mars, right? He's forward looking. Now those energies, anti-systemic energies, have different political valences. So in Nepal and Bangladesh, we have Gen Z protests bringing down an established government in the name of democracy. So it's not all reactionary, but it's an energy that can be tapped into for reactionary purposes. So in terms of the mobilization, I agree that there's definitely a mobilization of aggrieved masculinities. Obviously, male grievance and misogyny is centuries old, right? So that's not difficult to tap into. But I think there's a very good piece by Stephen Roberts and colleagues in the European Journal of Cultural Studies, which talks about instructed victimhood, right? So there's a definite, a lot of money is being spent to instruct young men in particular in their sense of victimhood, right? So while we need to be talking to young men about why they're feeling victimized, et cetera, we also need to be exposing the networks and institutions and forces that are instructing that victimhood, and recognize that there's an emotional complexity to men's sense of grievance as well, right? So Movember UK did a study just published about why young men are drawn to particular online influencers. Some of it's about grievance, some of it's about anti-feminism, some of it's about body image, some of it's about loneliness, some of it's about girlfriend issue. In other words, men are going there with different emotional needs to be met, right? So I think partly what we need to do is recognize that emotional complexity. And so the piece here about the mental health discussion, the sexuality discussion is really critical to that. And then in terms of the authoritarianism and nationalism, I think what we also have to reckon with is, what I'm seeing is a populist authoritarianism, right? Masculinity is being used to popularize authoritarianism. So that's partly this insurrectionary energy that I talked about. Nations, national borders here, certainly, many parts of Europe, again, it's going to look different in different places, but I think the notion of the border is becoming increasingly significant in terms of the backlash. And I think there you see some very intense links between anti-trans narratives and anti-immigrant narratives, right? Where threatened womanhood is central to both, right? Threatened womanhood is central to the anti-trans narrative and essential to the anti-immigrant narrative, right? So there's a conjoining of those narratives and agendas which we need to pay attention to. And I think this mobilization of authoritarianism, this populist authoritarianism, I think it's partly to do with it's what's sometimes called a re-enchantment of politics, right? After 20 or 30 years of neoliberal technocracy, politics is now energized again, right? That is literally what Trump has done, right? He's re-energized politics. Whatever you think of his particular politics, he's re-energized it, right? And at that kind of political activity, political engagement, political activism is very masculine coded, I think. There's a move from, femininity is passivity, masculinity is activity. And I think with that masculinized activity comes a growing sense of impunity. So to me, what we're entering into now from Israel's genocide in Gaza onwards is an era of impunity. So that's going to be a particular challenge to the CSW conversation next year. We have to reckon with notions of access to justice when in real time, in this country at least, institutions of justice are being torpedoed, right? Obliterated. So that impunity, and I think it's going to take a very interesting in inverted commas, form, literally in terms of men being recruited into security sector forces, right? So the growth of ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement here, is being definitely masculine coded, right? This is a way to assert, reestablish your masculinity by literally joining ICE, right? Some of the advertising campaigns center those masculinized themes of protection. They even had a father-son thing going on, right? You can bond with your younger generation by both joining ICE, right? So that sense of masculinized security work is then conjoined with what is ICE, right? It's an instrument of impunity. They can do what they want. They literally are saying that, right? Now, again, I'm speaking from the US context, and this will look different in different places, but as you can see from the speech this morning, he's exporting this approach, right? He's literally telling everybody, this is what we're doing here, this is what you should be doing in your country. It's getting exported. So the concept, so our backlash work has to be, to me, undertaken in relation to these political contexts. And I think the online aspect of this cannot be understated. To me, the internet is like an anger anxiety machine, right? It's stoking anger, it's stoking anxiety. A lot's been written about the attention economies that drive that, you know, the advertising-driven business model that feeds the algorithmic incitement of those emotions. But it's also, as this paper suggests, it's politically weaponized, right? So there are political purposes behind this anger and anxiety stoking because it feeds an emergency politics, a politics which happens in this kind of agitated sense of we're living in a continuing emergency, right? And that's what justifies the security, the impunity, the violence, the backlash. So we need to reckon with this kind of politics of emergency that's being cultivated. And I think the manosphere there is really important. I think we're beyond the stage where it's like we think of the manosphere as this distinct number of particular sites and channels. It's much more diffuse than that. And I think we need to expose the way it's both a grift and a grooming. So the manosphere, it's all about selling things to anxious and angry young men, right? They're all marketing, all the influencers are marketing something to you. It's also a grooming, right? It's a grooming into this right-wing authoritarian politics, right? It's a gateway into it. Some great work done by Alan Finlayson, political scientist in the UK, who talks about these influencers. We should think of them as political entrepreneurs, right? They're changing politics, partly through this kind of notion of we're exposing what's really going on in this whole kind of conspiracism. So there's a politics of conspiracism and exposure, you know, the red pill thing from the Matrix. So there's a growth of political voices online which claim to be exposing the real truth behind the facades that the elites are presenting to us. And that's what we need to be reckoning with. So just quickly, I know we'll get short on time. I mean, the 10 ways to work with men and boys, I agree with wholeheartedly. I think the only thing I would say is that, you know, some of us in the room have been doing this work a long time. And there's a lot here that isn't that new, I would say. And I think it's incumbent upon us to really reflect on, we are living in unprecedented, to me, we're living in unprecedented times. So we can't just be doing what we have been doing, because that's clearly not working. So we need to be thinking expansively, creatively. So when we talk about allyship and accountability, I think we need to be thinking in terms of broader social solidarities and collective action. We need, you know, male-female allyship in the context of solidarity with anti-racist struggles, economic justice struggles, pro-immigration struggles, etc., because we're all being threatened, and we're all being threatened partly by being siloed and picked off. So we need broader senses of solidarity. I think we need to work with anger as a field, I think we're a bit uncomfortable with men's anger for understandable reasons because of its links with men's violence. But there's a lot of anger out there, and we need to find ways to talk about it and channel it more politically. Right? We can't just leave the anger for them to use. We need to channel it more. And then I think in terms of spaces and shifting narratives, I think there are lots of spaces where we can try and be more present. We don't always have to book a room in the Baha'i Center and call men in to talk to us. We need to be going out more into other spaces and talking to men there. Right? And obviously we are trying to do that, but I think we need a more conscious effort. So to me, when we say the right messenger, Zora Mamdani is our messenger, right? He doesn't talk about masculinity much. He just exudes a pro-feminist, anti-racist masculinity, right? The Democratic candidate for the New York mayoralty.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to be more creative about thinking about messengers as well.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. A lot of great points. I think, yeah, we need to reconsider some of the strategies and thinking around how do we engage, not in a very traditional way, but also new ways of engaging and questioning. So yeah, I'm a bit concerned about the time now. I'll invite Nayana for your intervention. Yeah.
Yeah, and how many minutes will you give? I'll take less. Yeah. Because I'll take less because a lot of what I wanted to say has been said by the fellow panelists, and it's amazing to hear how we need to work through various different ways of solidarity building, movement building, and also build solidarity with groups across which are not necessarily working on gender-based discrimination or gender-based marginalization, but other marginalization too. So thank you for that. I just wanted all of us to kind of remember that there was this study by MIT which says that false news or which is untrue moves 70% faster than truth. Yeah, and it was a 2018 study, and I think it has since started moving even faster. Yeah, and this is a study which had taken out the bots, which had taken out the mechanical support, but it was seen that in Twitter, if there is a false news with some fear list to it, it's going to be shared much more faster, and the depth is achieved 20 times faster than anything. So these 10 things that we are talking about, that can they be taken to men by the kind of messages that we were trying to build? Will they reach to people? Yeah, they will reach to people, but the false narrative with a fear tactic will reach faster. That's one thing we must remember, because we are constantly pulling ourselves down, and I do that every night. I say something that I'm doing is wrong. Why am I not being able to reach to the people who should be hearing what we want to talk about? The second thing I wanted to bring in was this, that we work in areas of India wherein we see that India is known for digital penetration. People talk about digital penetration quite a lot, but we know that girls do not have access to digital world. So the digital literacy gap, our literacy gap is about 20%. The digital literacy gap somewhere stands around 40 to 50%. And also when girls access mobile phones, it is tracked, it is looked at, it is seen what they are watching, but that's not the same with boys. So when we go to the field areas and we want to do something with the digital media, we see that the boys already have a mindset wherein they're talking to us about gold digging
women. And then you talk to them about, so who's a gold digger? Have you seen somebody around you? And they would say, no, there is nobody here. But they will be able to pick up a character from the internet world who has not behaved like nicely to their husbands according to the internet world, how much money they have taken in alimony. So, you know, when I was hearing about this whole issue around dowry, that is something that's being dismantled. The dowry law was such an important law. And even now today, we have one woman dying of dowry-related violence in India every 1.5 hours, right? Yeah, so that's the number of deaths we see in dowry, and we are still dismantling the law. And it's very interesting that you say that, and I also know that women coming into the workforce makes a lot of sense. Women learning, doing the job, being out there, leading makes a lot of economic sense. But the other thing, the fear mongering is also making a lot of economic sense, might be in the short term. Otherwise, when I see the kind of amount that's being put behind that kind of fear mongering in terms of making films that are vilifying women, in terms of how much the media highlights if a woman during her honeymoon kills her husband, it becomes like a nationwide rage. And whereas these 18 women dying every day, nobody bats an eyelash, right? So so we have to see that this is somewhere making sense, right? And if this is making sense and the false narrative actually move faster, when I look at the 10 points, I also feel that we must hold the technology platforms, the digital platforms accountable. They have to take accountability. It can't be that the broadcasters are going to be held accountable in terms of telling the truth, and the digital world can give anything. They can actually spread anything. And also the digital world is not going to protect a woman who's trying to speak in the digital world. They will say that, oh, you're just being digitally bullied. That's not real, but we know that's real, right? Women who are threatened online are also killed offline. They're tracked and killed offline. So these two things have to be quickly taken into account. The three things that I think that speak to me the most in terms of how is in terms of foster allyship and accountability, like you were saying. And accountability is tough. You feel very, you feel on the back foot if anyone holds you accountable. So not only we must hold the anger as real, we must hold the grieving as real. There is a grief that is there. Also, the whole insecurity around that this is a world in which our traditional ways of working is not working anymore. Like men have been working in a certain way, which is not working anymore. And then I don't want to put the accountability on myself to learn new ways of handling it. I want to put it on somebody else. It can be an immigrant. It can be Muslims in India. It can be women in all parts of the world, right? So I always want to look for somebody else to talk about. And of course, the whole issue about the digital and working very creatively with the technology. But you know that Breakthrough works a lot with digital media, and we constantly produce. We also work with influencers. The only thing I am putting here is we are up against forces that's none of our business. It's the forces are too huge unless they are held accountable, unless they are said that, no, This is not the kind of news that can go out. You have to say that this is falsehood, because we are harming democracy, we are harming peace in the world, and we are harming justice. So this is what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Thank you. No, definitely, I think we need to, it is indeed a life and death situation for many, right? Who are directly or indirectly involved. And I think, there is we do need to bring in the tech industry in the conversation as a way to hold account. How can Meta, for example, just release the fact checkers immediately, just in one instance, because now there is a power holder in the room who says, yeah, you can get away with it. The level of impunity that is being created is massive. And also, how do we really bring them in the conversation? I think that's a very, very important point. So with that, we'd like to invite two colleagues who are, Lopa from UN Women and Jimmy, who has been in that, joining online, who has been in this space for a very long time as well, for some of their remarks on observing. And you just heard about the presentation we made and the points being made by the colleagues. So if you have any reactions to that, based on where you are sitting, what are the things that you are observing? And then we'll go to Mabel for the closing. So just so that you know, we will try and round off on time as much. But yeah, over to you, Lopa, first, and then we'll go to Jimmy.
Thank you so much. And this is such an important conversation. So thank you very, very much for convening this and for this fact sheet, for all of the conversation. I want to talk a little bit about this, going back, sort of lifting a little bit off from Alan's point about, backlash is not prominent to your first point that you laid out in your framing when you talked about masculinity as a tool for authoritarianism. I want to, if we just cast our eyes back to politics in the world over the last 100 years or so. Authoritarianism is not new, right? You went through a whole period when countries came out of colonial systems, became independent, and then went back into authoritarian regimes in multiple different countries. Authoritarian regimes were established. But they were established, dictatorships were established through military coups, and all of these back in the history. Today, authoritarianism is being established through democratic processes. If you look at or wherever you're looking at these countries, they're not military coups. Right. So there is the fact that this years of democracy and democratic disarray, which actually in country after country, which actually did not deliver what was seen to be the rights for everybody, including the sort of the marginalized people, which includes men. So the notion of backlash now, if we sort of unpack it a little bit and to say, okay, so what does that actually look like? Yeah, of course, there's the manosphere and all of this, but in real ways, when countries are talking about backlash. So as you know, UN Women has been talking about this statistic continuously since last year, or sort of early this year, about 1 in 4 countries reporting backlash. So what does that mean? It means exactly this: legislative rollback. It means legitimization of violence, state legitimization of violence with public support of that legitimization. It means depletion of resources to feminist mobilizing, because it is seen as detrimental to a national not just solidarity, but as sort of a national cohesion. So mobilizing and civic activism is detrimental to national cohesion. The criminalizing of dissent, feminist dissent. The fact that one in two governments are saying that their national gender institutions don't have the resources, don't have the staff, don't have the ability to actually function. Only 1 in 4 countries can actually track how much they are spending on gender equality. All of this is actually contributing to what today is a sort of a democratic, sort of erosion, and leading to this the ways in which populations are facing tremendous economic fragility, and therefore the point that Alan was making about insecure, marginalized groups of people, and men among them, but women as well. And so remember that the fact that these authoritarian regimes are coming to power democratically is not because only men are voting for them. So as we look at framing this idea of looking at narratives, it is really important to look at the issues around labor justice, the issues around migration, immigrant justice, racial justice, the aspects around incarceration, punitive drug policies, the notion of criminalization and looking at restorative approaches to it rather than retribution, because again, the retribution aspect of it, sort of aligns with this, a hyper performative masculinity. And I'm always nervous about calling it, it is certainly hyper performative. And it is certainly a from where I sit, I think we have a better way of framing it and addressing it if we call it hyper performative power. Because masculinity, it is of course patriarchy, it is about establishing power hierarchies. But there is a way in which that power hierarchy is being established, including through, in many different countries, women as flag bearers of that kind of power. So that when we look at this idea around backlash, there is a way of framing it and understanding it when you're talking in terms of shifting narratives. That doesn't look at only masculinities, but an aspect of understanding, performative power, and therefore how that leads to this legitimization of, for example, right now, legitimization of spending in militarization over everything else, not just over gender equality, over education, over health, over so that aspect of reconstructing society in a certain image of authoritarianism, and therefore everything else that you see related to it.
Thank you, Lopa.
That performative lens is so important.
Exactly. No, I think, I think, one of the things that is emerging, as much as the masculinities is being weaponized, now we are seeing initiatives, again, online spaces, initiative that is militarizing femininity, but also inculcating extremely unhelpful feminine as well, like trad wives movement, for example, which is on the other side of the spectrum, where the femininity is being kind of, again, called out to be more regressive, more passive, and that is being, we need to confront that as well as we talk about backlash in both Rian in terms of how do we put that in a context, and at the national nation state level, definitely becomes, and the whole understanding of democracy, whether democracy is the solution, right? So that's a good question. We are grappling with in Nepal right now. We had a democratically elected, but it's all manipulated to among these three men. So what does that mean? So with that, Jimmy, over to you if you want to share some thoughts.
For that issue, just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a phenomenal conversation thus far. I know we're winding down time, so I'll be, if I'm very brief. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there, but really inspired by what's been said thus far. I'll speak, very briefly. I know people are ready to conclude, both with a philanthropic hat on, but also with a journalistic hat on. On the philanthropy side, and I work in philanthropy now, 15 years ago, I was a co-founder and co-collaborator of an initiative called Man Up Campaign, which served as an organ to engage, educate, and catalyze young people, young men and boys, to be allies and defenders against sexual and gender violence. And I think, for me, 15 years later, being a part of this conversation, I think Alan referred to this before. A lot of what's in this, the fact sheet feels familiar, but some of it's quite new. And I appreciate kind of the evolution of thinking and how you all brought together all these different points to really meet and address the moment we're in now. One thing I think we, just to stress from my perspective, is the need to not just see young people, young men and boys as challenges or problems to be solved, but also as collaborators with the effort. My personal philosophy is nothing about us without us. And I think, we have to have the voices and people in these rooms, this is the room you're in now, but also, in the spaces where we're talking about policy, talking about funding, talking about transforming culture. The other thing too, and I think Alex and Alan and Lopa referred to this so eloquently, is really the need to understand, and the fact she names this, but to better utilize narrative, change, and storytelling, which for me ultimately means culture. I feel like the forces that attract young men and boys to the so-called manosphere, understand culture in a way that, frankly, a lot of us are not really grasping, understanding quite well. It's very sophisticated. It's very well funded. It's very strategic. And I think whether it's online in the manosphere or in popular culture through television or streaming platforms, or even through music, there's an orchestrated, aligned strategy and way of thinking to enlist, to indoctrinate young men, actually boys, into leaning towards more regressive gender norms around manhood and masculinity that those of us who have more progressive thinking, just frankly speaking, I feel are not quite there. From a philanthropic perspective, right now, as you probably know, there's such a tremendous energy within the institutional funder and individual donor community to support, men and quote unquote men and boys efforts. There have been some major commitments made in the past year, multi-million-dollar commitments, to individuals and organizations, respectively. And even now, a lot of foundations based in the U.S. and in Europe are, throughout this week and TSW earlier this year, next year, I'm sure, meeting privately to talk about where is the leverage for donors to support initiatives that will create systemic change in the near and long term. And so I would encourage and engage in SBRI and your allies in this working group and this report to really maintain proximity with institutional funders and donors, because, from my perspective, seeing what I'm seeing, hearing what I'm hearing, a lot of how funders are talking about this is how I think the space was talking about it 5, 10 years ago. They're not quite where this group, where this document is yet. I think that the learning curve is quite high, and there's a role, not just a grantee role, but there's a role to really bring along funders who have leverage because of the size of their endowments, their financial power, but also because of their name signal that funding certain initiatives will be a signal to other funders or to even government funders that an effort or program or a strategy is worthwhile. So I just think it's really critical that funders be not necessarily part of the research in a document like this, but definitely part of the conversation in terms of where assets can go that have both measurable impact. And I think and I think Alex said this so eloquently, lest people end up funding efforts, funding individuals, funding movements that actually create more challenges in the work that we're all committed to doing in the future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, GB. Definitely financing is much an important issue that we all confront as well. So with that, the plan was also, I'm really sorry that the plan was to have a debate in the room as well or online. But yeah, as we know, the intensity, the emotions we have with this topic keeps on. But yeah, I think maybe if there's any burning comment from anyone that you would like to share or raise as a question that we can live with and continue to grapple. And this is the first time, sorry, not the first time, we will continue hosting dialogue spaces as well. So this is the beginning, and we will definitely be able to come back to the question if anyone have anything to share. Yeah, Puranga.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for this session. I think I've learned a lot, and it's been very fresh to help crystallize some of the thoughts that I've been having around this specific moment. Especially thank you for that phrase, the era of impunities here, because I've been really trying to understand what's the best way to describe what exactly is going on and how to just put it in a very real sense to me. I think for me and myself as a journalist as well, in terms as I've been trying to cover the manosphere, just this general shift towards putting the focus on trying to decode the problem of the political disenfranchisement of young men. Because of course the effects are real. For example, in Kenya, for us, I think a large part of our political violence problem is a disenfranchised young man problem. But I hear the room in terms of the aspect of avoiding the framing of a crisis of masculinity. And I would just want to maybe source any alternative perspectives on, yes, okay, so we're clear in terms of avoiding the aspect of the crisis of masculinity framing. But then what is the way forward with regards to that? And what is a clear danger we're trying to avoid when you put in the crisis of masculinity framing? Because again, for me, as a journalist, I like headlines. I need to sell stories. I need to pitch my editor. A crisis of masculinity is a very good framing for me to get my story out. Yeah, and it's a very good way to get audiences riled up. It's the right way to get people's attention. Because I will say this, patriarchy is interesting because when we try to get people to focus on men, it is one of the toughest things possible, even from a narrative perspective. How do we write about this issue in a way that people will pay attention? This is the biggest struggle I have as I work around my own pieces of work around this issue. So, I mean, I'm open to just taking any ideas from the room in terms of just understanding, how should we be thinking about painting this issue, at least at a media level? At a headline level, maybe, okay, of course, there's the entertainment side, around the whole idea of positive role models, positive role modeling around that. So I think I'll just make my point very sharp in that specific point. And secondly, just one second thing that came to my mind is, the people that we are talking against, let's call them the opposition in specific sense. Do they organize like this? How do they meet in rooms and have round tables? I would love to know what they do. Yeah, because and I'd love to know because they seem to be very effective, and we've been fighting this battle for a very long time. So I think that's
The thing is, when you say this is everything. It's in all society. It's like governments. I'm sorry, but this is what it is. This is what is. So it's not the they as it. I mean, yes, there may be the movements, and there are some anti-rights groups and so on. So there's those aspects. But it's the system, right? It's the entire system. So it's not as though it's they. And again, when you're talking in terms of I'm sort of struck by how you talk in terms of restoring traditional power hierarchies. But actually, the power hierarchies that are wealth, race, religion. That is not traditional. That's historical. The system. systemic and historical. Those are the power hierarchies that are being promoted and strengthened through this whole process, right?
So yeah, we'll definitely need more conversation for sure. We will probably do another round to dwell exactly on this. I think, and then we are organizing as many as a third session on the series of GVV, exactly looking at that. So maybe we can share you the invite to join that conversation, because we are looking at how do we strategize on working with boys and men on ending the GVV in the spectrum as a whole, and address some of these anxieties that boys and young men have in particular. And yeah, the ways forward as well. That is what the space will look like. I'm mindful of time. Sorry, Mabel. Over to you if you want to just round off us and
very
share.
short because we are on time. But first of all, thanks because I couldn't be earlier because I have in another meeting. But well, for us in Latin America and the Caribbean, the issue is not new. We have suffered this for many years, and it is associated to religious and military and establishment associated to the political establishment, how we say. So we used to have the military army processes very often, but also we used to have this kind of democratic authoritarian government. So if you can look in our story, many of our countries, they were strong, in generally army people, army men that became Jews by voting, but they are completely authoritarian and making things as if they were a army government. And this is associated. So we are very used to that. So for us, it's not new. The new thing now is about the two issues, I think. First of all, how we advance. So now it's different how the people look. Not only some of us, different people, common people. Not us, but that we are not common people because we have something different in mind. But the common people now is not so much accepting that. Those that accept more are the youngest, and especially men, but also some young girls, because they suppose that now is the moment that the feminists, we are using our power. We are not in the government. We are not having any power. I don't know what they suppose we are having, but okay, they suppose due to the how it was presented. But this is the issue. But it's very interesting that when some of our governments, specifically my president, tomorrow I invite all of you to listen what he's going to say here. He's telling about against gender equality. There the boys are saying, no, that's not what we want. So take care. It's good to go against the women's, the feminists. We are the bad, we are those, but not for gender. No. This must remain an issue. And this is something I think is completely different from 20, 30, or 40 years ago, where they could be doing that. The other point is how they are used, our governments, and also the societies about the authorities. They not to be able, for us, democracy is to go to vote. This is not democracy. This is only going to vote. But this is not participation. This is not making things happening, discussing and so on. So that's why, well, we accept in a way our societies, the authoritarians and the impunity. And this is the problem that we are used to. So we need to bring them against that. And I must say that the feminists, many years ago in preparation for Cairo and Beijing, we started to speak about masculinities. We are old-fashioned now. We don't know, we need to change that, because this is not anymore. Yeah, that's the difference, but we start 30 years ago, we start talking about that. And now we need to come back and change. And this is what we need to do. And I think it's good, very good to do this with young people, because the young people, and I must say adolescents are great. They didn't differentiate. They have really an issue of equality and needs to not discriminate, not differentiate, that they lost with the years. So we need to try to come back to them, listen to them, and change that. And I think we need to avoid to speak about masculinities clearly. So we need to change that. Also, we need to avoid to speak about feminism, because they are both patriarchal ways. Many years ago, now anymore, we need to destroy that. So I think this is a great effort. I'm very happy. And we are going to use a lot, but I think we need to start changing. And this is something that we need to learn all around, because no one knows how to do it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Mel. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the speakers, for your thoughts. That was really helpful, and also highlights the need for continuation of it. And we commit to do that in coming days. Feel free to take a couple of more copies of the report if you want to share it with your colleagues, with your other people or friends. And then, yeah, we will share with you some other documents or resources as well in email. And thank you for joining. And thank you, Lily, for hosting us here. And then thanks, Lily and GS team, for all the prep work. That was please do some justice to the food. I see still a lot there. If you want to take some of it as well, please do that. I encourage you to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Much needed, but like, but the.